In the sleepy village of Hazelmoor, whispers of strange lights and footsteps haunt Crooked Lane, where an old gatehouse hides a decades-old secret. When Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and sharper mind, hears of a limping stranger digging in the shadows, she unravels a mystery tied to stolen jewels, a vanished thief, and a desperate brother's return. From eerie yew trees to a cunning trap, follow Miss Marple as she pieces together clues to uncover a hidden treasure, proving no secret stays buried forever in this thrilling tale of deception and discovery. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Village. The village of Hazelmoor drowsed under the pale autumn sun, its thatched cottages and tidy gardens exuding a deceptive calm. Crooked Lane, a shadowed path twisting past ancient yew trees, had lately become the heart of uneasy murmurs. At the Rose and Thorn tea shop, where the air smelled of warm scones and strong tea, the villagers gathered daily to exchange news, and today the talk was livelier than usual. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her customary corner by the window, her knitting needles moving with quiet precision, listened as the conversation turned to the lane. Mrs. Pemberley, the postmistress, her round face flushed with the thrill of gossip, leaned across the counter. "I tell you, it's not natural," she said, her voice low but carrying. "Old Mr. Hargreaves saw lights flickering in Crooked Lane last night near the old gatehouse, and he heard footsteps, clear as day, where no one ought to be walking at midnight. The other patrons, Mrs. Langley from the vicarage, young Bessie from the grocer's, and Dr. Haydock, who had paused for a quick tea, murmured in agreement, their curiosity tinged with unease. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like behind her spectacles, betrayed no surprise. She adjusted the ball of soft blue wool in her lap and said mildly, "People do see things in the dark, don't they? Shadows and imagination can play such tricks." But her tone held a note that suggested she thought otherwise. "Still," she added, her needles clicking rhythmically, "lights and footsteps often have reasons, like that odd business with my friend's gardener, who thought he saw a ghost, but found it was only a poacher." Mrs. Pemberley, undeterred, pressed on. "Mr. Hargreaves isn't one for fancies. He says it's happened 3 nights running. And Bessie here saw a man loitering near the lane yesterday. Didn't you, dear?" Bessie, a rosy-cheeked girl of 17, nodded vigorously. "He was tall, with a dark coat," she said, "and he walked funny like he was limping. I didn't like the look of him." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second. A limping man, a deserted lane, and lights in the night, it was the sort of puzzle that stirred her quiet but relentless curiosity. Hazelmoor, for all its charm, was no stranger to secrets. She recalled a similar tale from her youth, when a village much like this one had whispered of midnight prowlers, only to uncover a smuggling ring. "How very interesting," she said, her voice as gentle as ever. "I think I shall take a walk along Crooked Lane this evening. The air does one good, and I've always liked those old yews." The tea-shop conversation drifted to other matters, Mrs. Langley's charity bazaar, Dr. Haydock's new assistant, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the lane. She finished her tea, gathered her knitting, and stepped into the crisp October air, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the cobblestones. Hazelmoor's high street was quiet, save for the occasional bicycle bell or the bark of a dog, but the weight of unspoken stories hung about it like the mist that gathered each evening. As dusk fell, Miss Marple wrapped herself in a warm shawl and set out for Crooked Lane. The path was narrow, its cobbles uneven underfoot, and the yews loomed like silent sentinels, their branches casting long, twisted shadows. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. She walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground, the trees, the hedges, noting every detail with the clarity of long practice. At the far end of the lane stood the gatehouse, a crumbling relic of the manor that had once dominated Hazelmoor. Its windows were dark, its stone walls choked with ivy, yet it seemed to watch her approach. Near the gatehouse, where the lane curved sharply, Miss Marple paused. A faint glow flickered through the mist, brief and elusive, like a firefly's spark. She stood still, her breath barely stirring, and watched as it vanished. Then, from the shadows beyond the gatehouse, came the rustle of movement. A figure, tall and cloaked in a dark coat, moved swiftly out of sight. The uneven gait, almost a limp, was unmistakable. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Now, who might you be?" she murmured to herself, thinking of another dark lane and another secretive figure from a case long ago. She did not linger. The hour was late, and Hazelmore's evenings were not kind to those who wandered alone. As she retraced her steps, the village lights glowing softly in the distance, Miss Marple's mind was already at work. Lights, footsteps, a limping stranger, these were threads in a tapestry she had yet to weave. People are so predictable, she thought, and yet so surprising. Like my old friend Laura's cousin, who hid his troubles behind a smile until the truth came out. Tomorrow, she decided, she would pay a visit to Mrs. Cutler, whose cottage overlooked the lane. A basket of scones and a bit of neighborly chat might uncover more than the village gossip had yet revealed. Chapter 2. The Gatehouse Mystery. The morning sun cast a feeble glow over Hazelmore, barely piercing the mist that clung to the village like a reluctant guest. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the chill, set out early, her basket swinging lightly on her arm. It contained a half-dozen scones, still warm from her oven, wrapped in a clean cloth and offering for Mrs. Cutler, whose cottage stood closest to the old gatehouse at the end of Crooked Lane. Miss Marple's steps were brisk, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, for the events of the previous evening had stirred her curiosity to a fine point. The flickering light, the limping figure vanishing into the shadows. These were not mere village fancies but clues, and she intended to unravel them. Mrs. Cutler's cottage was a modest affair, its garden a riot of late-blooming asters and tangled ivy. The woman herself, thin and nervous as a sparrow, opened the door with a start, her hands fluttering to her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple, what a kindness!" she exclaimed, eyeing the basket. "Do come in. It's ever so damp out there." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as gentle as ever, and stepped into the cramped parlor, where a fire crackled fitfully in the grate. The air smelled of lavender and slightly burnt toast, and a kettle hummed on the stove. Over tea, poured into chipped china cups, Miss Marple steered the conversation with the deftness of long practice. "I was walking by Crooked Lane last night," she said, her voice mild. "Such a quiet spot, though I hear there's been talk of odd goings-on." Mrs. Cutler's eyes widened as she leaned forward, her earlier hesitance forgotten. "Oh, you've heard, then. It's that gatehouse, Miss Marple. My Tommy's been telling tales. Says he saw a man there, skulking about, old as brass. A stranger, with a limp, wearing a dark coat. I told him to stay clear, but you know boys, always poking their noses where they shouldn't." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly as she drew them from her bag, more for comfort than necessity. "Boys do see things, don't they?" she said. "I remember my nephew Raymond's friend, young Peter, who once spotted a thief in the vicarage garden because he'd hidden there to dodge his chores." "What did Tommy say about this man?" Mrs. Cutler, eager now, recounted Tommy's story. The man had been near the gatehouse at dusk, carrying a spade, his movements furtive. "Tommy said he looked like he didn't want to be seen," she added, "and I've heard noises myself, creaks and thumps, like someone's moving about in that old ruin." The gatehouse, Miss Marple knew, was a relic of Hazelmore's grander days, when the manor employed a small army of servants. Its stone walls now crumbling, and its broken windows gave it a desolate air, but she sensed it held more than cobwebs and memories. "How curious," she murmured, her eyes drifting to the window, where Crooked Lane was just visible through the mist. "I suppose the gatehouse hasn't been lived in since old Silas Trent's day, has it?" Mrs. Cutler shook her head. "Not since Silas vanished, and that was before my time. Folks say he was mixed up in something shady stolen jewels, they reckoned, though nothing was ever proved. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the details. Silas Trent, the groundskeeper, had disappeared some 30 years ago after a theft at the manor, a theft of emeralds and sapphires that were never recovered. The village had buzzed with theories, but Silas was long gone, presumed dead by most. Yet the gatehouse, with its new disturbances, suggested someone thought otherwise. People do come back to old places, she said, almost to herself, like my old friend Mrs. Bantry's cousin, who returned to his village after years away, chasing a foolish dream of buried treasure. She stayed a little longer, letting Mrs. Cutler ramble about Tommy's antics and the village's woes, but her thoughts were on the gatehouse. As she left, promising to send over a recipe for her scones, she resolved to speak with Inspector Craddock. He was in Hazelmoor on routine business, staying at the Blue Boar Inn, and she found him in the lounge, poring over a stack of reports. Craddock, a young man with a sharp mind and a healthy respect for Miss Marple's insights, greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not more village mysteries, I hope." She smiled, settling into a chair. "Oh, nothing so grand, Inspector, but I've heard talk of lights and a stranger in Crooked Lane. A limping man seen near the gatehouse. It's probably nothing, but I thought you might like to know." Her tone was light, but her eyes held a glint that Craddock had learned to heed. He jotted down a note, his brow furrowing. "Lights and a limping stranger? Sounds like someone's up to no good. I'll have a constable take a look, though that gatehouse is half falling down. Hardly a place for anyone to linger." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their quiet rhythm, "but deserted places have a way of attracting attention, don't they? Like that empty barn in Chipping Cleghorn, where a certain young man hid stolen goods until the police caught up with him." Craddock grinned, recognizing her knack for drawing parallels. "You've a point, as always. I'll make sure we keep an eye on the lane." As Miss Marple walked home, the village settling into its midday hush, she considered the pieces of the puzzle. The limping man, the lights, the gatehouse, it all pointed to a purpose, something hidden or sought after. She thought of Silas Trent and the stolen jewels, wondering if the stranger was a relic of that old scandal. The village, with its quiet lanes and nosy neighbors, was a microcosm of human nature, and Miss Marple knew that secrets, like weeds, had a way of surfacing. Back in her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap, and let her mind wander. The gatehouse was the key, she was certain, but why now, after all these years? She recalled a conversation with her old friend Sir Henry Clithering, who had once said, "The past has a long reach, Jane, and it doesn't let go easily." The stranger, she suspected, was no random wanderer, but someone with a connection to Hazelmoor's history, someone who believed the gatehouse held answers. Outside, the mist thickened, curling around the yews of Crooked Lane like a shroud. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. She would return to the lane, perhaps tomorrow, and see what else it might reveal. For now, she poured herself another cup of tea, her mind already weaving the threads of Hazelmoor's latest mystery into a pattern only she could see. Chapter 3. A shadow from the past, the village of Hazelmoor awoke to a clamor that shattered its usual tranquility. Old Mr. Hargreaves, the gardener who tended the manor's overgrown grounds, had been found at dawn slumped against a hedge on Crooked Lane, a livid bruise blooming on his temple. Dr. Haydock, summoned from his breakfast, declared it a minor injury, but the news spread swiftly, igniting fresh whispers in the tea shop and the grocer's. By mid-morning, the story had grown. Mr. Hargreaves had been attacked, some said, by the limping stranger seen near the gatehouse. Miss Jane Marple, informed of the incident by a breathless Bessie delivering her morning paper, wasted no time. She wrapped a jar of her homemade marmalade in brown paper, tied it with string, and set off for Mr. Hargreaves' modest cottage on the edge of the village. The old man, his head bandaged, sat by his fire, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he accepted her gift. "Kind of you, Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but shaken. "I don't know what came over me. Tripped, I reckon, in the dark." Her eyes, keen as ever, noted the flicker of unease in his expression. "Tripped, Mr. Hargreaves? How unfortunate," she said, her tone gentle but probing. "And so near Crook Lane, where you've seen those curious lights." She settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side, and waited, knowing silence often coaxed truths from reluctant tongues. After a moment, he leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I saw him again, miss. That man with the limp. Last night, near the gatehouse, digging he was, with a spade. I got too close, and well, I don't rightly remember after that." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing counterpoint to his agitation. "Digging, you say? How very odd," she remarked, her mind racing. "It reminds me of a gardener I knew in my youth, who dug up his mistress's rose beds, for reasons quite beyond flowers." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "Did you notice anything else about this man?" Mr. Hargreaves hesitated, then muttered, "He wore a dark coat, and his face scarred, I think, on the cheek. But it was dark, and I was rattled." Thanking him, Miss Marple left, her thoughts turning to Hazelmore's past. The gatehouse, the lights, the limping stranger, it all circled back to the scandal of Silas Trent, the groundskeeper who vanished 30 years ago after the manor's jewels went missing. The village had never forgotten the tale. Emeralds and sapphires stolen from Lady Harrington's boudoir, with Silas as the prime suspect. He'd fled, or so it was said, and the jewels were never found. Could this stranger be chasing that old mystery, stirred by some new clue? She made her way to the vicarage, where Mrs. Langley, the vicar's wife, kept a treasure trove of village records in a cluttered study. Over a cup of wheat tea, Miss Marple broached the subject. "I've been thinking of old stories," she said, "like that business with Silas Trent. Do you recall anything about his family?" Mrs. Langley, delighted to share her knowledge, rummaged through a box of yellowed papers. "Silas had a brother, Elias," she said, pulling out a faded letter. "A soldier, wounded in the war, had a limp, poor man, and a scar on his cheek from shrapnel. He came to Hazelmore after Silas vanished, swearing he'd find his brother's hiding place. The jewels, he meant. But he left soon after, empty-handed." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A limping man with a scarred cheek, Elias Trent, perhaps, returned after decades abroad? "How fascinating," she said, her voice as mild as ever. "People do hold grudges against time, don't they? Like my old friend's nephew, who spent years searching for a legacy that wasn't his." She thanked Mrs. Langley and left, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. Elias, if it was he, was no ghost, but a man driven by a decades-old obsession, and his digging suggested he believed the jewels were still hidden. That afternoon, she met Inspector Craddock at the Blue Boar Inn, where he was nursing a pint and reviewing his notes. She recounted Mr. Hargreaves' tale and the vicarage findings, her tone light but deliberate. A limping man digging at night, and now poor Mr. Hargreaves with a bruise. It's all rather suggestive, isn't it, Inspector? Craddock, his respect for her instincts unwavering, frowned. "Sounds like our stranger's getting bold. I'll have my men patrol the lane tonight, but that gatehouse is a ruin. What could he be after?" "Something lost long ago, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her needles pausing. "Old secrets have a way of drawing people back, like that case in St. Mary Mead, not our Hazelmore. Of course, where a man returned to find his father's hidden fortune." Craddock nodded, promising to investigate the gatehouse itself. As Miss Marple walked home, the autumn wind tugging at her shawl, she felt the threads of the mystery tightening. Elias Trent, or someone claiming his cause, was risking much to search the gatehouse. But why now, and what had prompted this sudden return? In her cottage, she sat by the window, knitting forgotten, as she gazed toward Crook Lane. The yews stood dark against the fading light, their branches whispering secrets of their own. She thought of Silas Trent, a man who'd vanished into the night, and his brother, scarred and limping, chasing a dream of stolen wealth. People are so predictable, she murmured, and yet so desperate. Tomorrow, she would speak to young Tommy Cutler, whose sharp eyes might have seen more than he'd yet told. For now, she sipped her tea, her mind weaving the village's whispers into a pattern that was, as yet, only half-formed. Chapter 4. The Stranger's Trail. The morning mist hung low over Hazelmoor, draping Crooked Lane in a veil that softened the sharp edges of the ancient yews. Miss Jane Marple, undaunted by the damp, sat in her parlor with a cup of tea, her knitting idle as she turned over the threads of the mystery. The limping stranger, the lights in the gatehouse, Mr. Hargreaves' bruise, it all pointed to a purpose, one tied to the long-ago theft of Lady Harrington's jewels. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was young Tommy Cutler, his cap askew and his cheeks flushed from running. "Miss Marple, Ma said I should tell you," he blurted, shifting from foot to foot. "I saw that man again, the one with the limp by the gatehouse last night. He was carrying a spade, and I swear he went inside." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "Did he now, Tommy? How very observant of you. I expect you were quite careful not to be seen, like my nephew's friend Peter, who once hid in a hayloft to watch a poacher." Tommy grinned, proud of his stealth. "I was in the bushes, miss. He didn't spot me. He looked right sneaky, poking about the floorboards." She offered him a biscuit from the tin, her mind racing. A man digging inside the gatehouse suggested more than idle curiosity. It was a deliberate search, perhaps for Silas Trent's hidden jewels. "Did you notice anything else, Tommy?" she asked, her voice as soft as the ticking of the mantel clock. The boy hesitated, then added, "He had a lantern, miss, and his coat was all muddy, like he'd been at it for a while." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. Muddy coats and lanterns spoke of persistence, and persistence hinted at conviction. Thanking Tommy, she sent him off with another biscuit and reached for her shawl. The gatehouse demanded closer scrutiny, but she knew better than to venture there alone. Instead, she made her way to the Blue Boar Inn, where Inspector Craddock was finishing a late breakfast. He looked up, his expression a mix of amusement and respect. "Miss Marple, I'm beginning to think Hazelmoor's mysteries find you on purpose." "What's new?" She recounted Tommy's tale, her tone light but precise. "A man digging inside the gatehouse, Inspector, with a lantern and a spade. It's rather suggestive, don't you think? Like that business in Chipping Leghorn, where a man was caught rummaging in an old barn for stolen silver." Craddock's brow furrowed. "Digging inside? That's bold. The gatehouse is barely standing hardly a place to hide anything valuable." He agreed to organize a discreet search, and by noon he and 2 constables were at the gatehouse, with Miss Marple following at a respectable distance, her umbrella serving as both prop and pretext. The building was a ruin, its stone walls damp and mossy, its floor a patchwork of broken boards and packed earth. Craddock's men moved carefully, their boots stirring dust as they searched. Near the back, beneath a pile of rotting crates, they found a trapdoor, its hinges rusted but recently disturbed. It opened to reveal a shallow cellar, empty save for a scattering of tools, a trowel, a crowbar, and a coil of rope. Fresh footprints marked the dirt, and a faint smell of oil suggested a lantern's recent use. Craddock frowned, puzzled. No jewels, no treasure, just tools. What's this fellow after? Miss Marple, peering over his shoulder, said nothing, but her eyes gleamed. "Someone believes there's something to find," she said at last, "and they're determined to get it, like my old friend's cousin, who dug up half his garden chasing a myth." As they left the gatehouse, Miss Marple lingered, noting the scuff marks on the floor and the faint scratches near the trapdoor. They suggested haste, perhaps desperation. Back in her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts elsewhere. The stranger Elias Trent, she was nearly certain, had returned to Hazelmoor after decades, driven by the same obsession that had sent him away. The jewels, if they existed, were the key, but the gatehouse's emptiness puzzled her. Was it a decoy, or had Silas been cleverer than anyone supposed? She recalled a conversation with her friend Sir Henry Clithering, who had once remarked, "The simplest hiding places are often the best, Jane, because no one thinks to look there." The gatehouse was too obvious, too expected. Perhaps the real hiding place was elsewhere, overlooked by all but Silas himself. She resolved to visit Mrs. Langley again, to see if the vicarage records held any clues about Silas's habits or haunts beyond the gatehouse. That evening, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Miss Marple walked to the vicarage, her steps slow but purposeful. Mrs. Langley, delighted by another visit, offered tea and produced a dusty ledger from the manor's groundskeeping days. Silas was particular about the ewes, she said, pointing to a faded entry. He spent hours tending them, especially the ones along Crooked Lane. Said they were older than the manor itself. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Ewes sturdy, enduring, and hollow in their old age. A perfect hiding place, perhaps, for a man who trusted no one. As she left the vicarage, the moon cast long shadows over Hazelmoor, and Crooked Lane lay silent, its secrets buried deep. Miss Marple's mind was alive with possibilities. Elias, or whoever the stranger was searching in the wrong place, but his actions were stirring the village, drawing attention to a mystery long dormant. People are so impatient, she mused. Like that young man in St. Mary Mead, not our Hazelmoor, who tore apart a cellar for nothing, when the truth was under his nose. Tomorrow she would watch the lane again, and perhaps speak to Tommy once more. For now she returned home, her knitting waiting, and the puzzle of Crooked Lane growing ever clearer in her sharp, quiet mind. Chapter 5. A dangerous encounter. The peace of Hazelmoor was shattered by a cry that echoed through the village just as the church clock struck 9. Mrs. Cutler, her face pale and her apron twisted in her hands, burst into the rose and thorn tea shop, where Miss Jane Marple sat quietly with her morning tea and knitting. "It's Tommy," Mrs. Cutler wailed, drawing every eye in the room. "He's ran off to spy on that man at the gatehouse, and he hasn't come home." Her voice broke, and Mrs. Pemberley, the postmistress, hurried to offer a chair and a glass of water, though her own hands trembled with the shock of the news. Miss Marple set down her needles. Her calm demeanor belied the quickening of her thoughts. "When did you last see him, Mrs. Cutler?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm, as if coaxing a nervous child. The distraught mother clutched her apron tighter. "Last evening, just before dusk. He said he was going to watch the gatehouse, to see if that limping man came back. I told him not to, but he's so headstrong, like his father was." Her eyes filled with tears, and Miss Marple patted her hand, thinking of another boy, years ago, who had wandered into trouble chasing adventure. "There now," she said softly. "We'll find him. Boys are resilient, like my nephew's friend Peter, who once got lost in a wood, but turned up safe, if a bit muddy." She rose, gathering her shawl, and promised to alert Inspector Craddock. The village was already stirring, with neighbors forming an impromptu search party, their lanterns bobbing in the morning mist as they fanned out toward Crooked Lane. Miss Marple joined them, her sensible shoes steady on the uneven path. The yews loomed darkly, their branches whispering in the breeze, and the gatehouse stood silent, its broken windows like empty eyes. The searchers called Tommy's name, their voices sharp in the still air. It was young Bessie, the grocer's girl, who spotted him first, curled in a ditch near the lane, his face smudged with dirt and his eyes wide with fright. "Tommy," Miss Marple called, hurrying forward as fast as her age allowed. The boy scrambled up, unharmed but shaken, and clung to her arm. "He grabbed me, Miss Marple," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. The man with the limp, he caught me watching by the gatehouse. Said I'd ruin everything if I told, and to keep my mouth shut. Miss Marple knelt beside him, her eyes searching his face. Did he hurt you, Tommy? She asked, her voice as calm as ever. The boy shook his head. No, miss, just shook me and let me go. But I saw his hand. There was a scar, right across the back, like a burn. She nodded, helping him to his feet as the search party gathered round, their relief palpable. Mrs. Cutler, summoned by a neighbor, enveloped Tommy in a tearful embrace, scolding and hugging him in equal measure. Miss Marple, however, was already piecing together the new clue. A scarred hand, a limping man. The description matched Elias Trent, Silas's brother, whose wartime injury had left such marks. The encounter suggested desperation, a man on the edge of his purpose, and she knew time was growing short. At the Blue Boar Inn, she found Inspector Craddock organizing his constables for a renewed search of the gatehouse. She relayed Tommy's story, her voice measured but urgent. He's frightened, Inspector, but unharmed, which is telling. Our stranger is bold, but not reckless yet. A scarred hand, a limp. It's Elias Trent, I'd wager, and he's closer to his goal than we think. Craddock, his respect for her instincts unshakable, rubbed his chin. Threatening a boy? That's a step too far. I'll double the patrols tonight, and we'll keep a watch on the lane. Miss Marple agreed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Elias, if it was he, was searching with increasing urgency, and Tommy's encounter suggested he feared exposure. Desperate men make mistakes, she said, almost to herself. Like that young man in a village I once knew, not Hazelmore, of course, who thought he could silence gossip with threats, only to trip over his own lies. Craddock nodded, promising to station a constable near the gatehouse after dark. If he's digging, we'll catch him at it, he said, his tone resolute. As she walked home, the village settling into an uneasy calm, Miss Marple considered the gatehouse's role. The tools, the trapdoor, the muddy coat Tommy had seen, they all pointed to a focused search, but the cellar's emptiness nagged at her. Was Elias mistaken, chasing a false trail, or had Silas hidden his prize elsewhere? She recalled a conversation with her friend Dolly Bantry, who had once said, "The cleverest thieves hide things where you'd never look. Jane, because it's too simple." The yews along Crooked Lane, tended so carefully by Silas, loomed in her mind, ancient, hollow, overlooked. Back in her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched as she stared out at the darkening sky. Elias's threat to Tommy was a crack in his caution, a sign of strain. People under pressure show their true colors, she murmured, thinking of a long-ago case where a thief's panic had led to his capture. Tomorrow, she would revisit Mrs. Langley's records to see if Silas had left any hint of a hiding place beyond the gatehouse. For now, she sipped her tea, the puzzle of Crooked Lane sharpening in her mind, its threads weaving tighter with each passing hour. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The morning in Hazelmore dawned with a brittle clarity, the mist lifting to reveal Crooked Lane's yews standing stark against a pale sky. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her small writing desk, penned a note to Inspector Craddock with a suggestion as bold as it was subtle. The stranger Elias Trent, she was now certain, was growing reckless, his threat to young Tommy Cutler a sign of fraying nerves. To catch him, they needed to draw him out, and Miss Marple had an idea, born of her knack for understanding the greed and hope that drove such men. A rumor, she wrote in her neat hand, carefully spread, can be as effective as a net. Let us say a historian has found a map pointing to the jewel's hiding place in the gatehouse. Our man will not resist. She delivered the note to the Blue Boar Inn herself, her steps measured but purposeful, her shawl wrapped tightly against the October chill. Craddock, poring over a map of Hazelmore with a constable, looked up with a wry smile. "Miss Marple, you're brewing something clever, aren't you?" he said, reading her note. She inclined her head, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. Only a little nudge, Inspector, to make our friend show his hand. Like that time in a village I knew not Hazelmoor, where a whispered tale of hidden gold brought a thief running. Craddock, though skeptical of village gossip as a police tactic, trusted her instincts. A map, eh? We'll spread the word, but discreetly through Mrs. Pemberley, perhaps. She's got a tongue that could wake the dead. Miss Marple nodded, knowing the postmistress's knack for sharing news would ensure the rumor reached every corner of Hazelmoor by dusk. Just so, she said, but do be ready, Inspector. A desperate man is like a cornered fox, unpredictable. By noon, the plan was in motion. Mrs. Pemberley, primed with a vague tale of a historian's discovery, mentioned it over tea at the Rose and Thorn, her voice carrying to eager ears. Bessie, the grocer's girl, overheard and told her customers, and by evening, the village buzzed with talk of a map pinpointing Silas Trent's stolen jewels in the gatehouse. Miss Marple, knitting quietly in her parlor, smiled to herself. People are so quick to believe what they want, she murmured, recalling a similar ruse that had flushed out a swindler in her youth. As night fell, Craddock positioned his men carefully. 2 constables hid in the shrubbery near Crook Lane, their lanterns doused, while he took cover behind the gatehouse's crumbling wall. Miss Marple, wisely staying home, sat by her window, her knitting a pretext as she watched the lane's dark outline. The village was silent, save for the occasional hoot of an owl, and the air held the taut stillness of expectation. At midnight, the trap sprang. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with the uneven gait Miss Marple had come to expect. He carried a spade and a dim lantern, its light flickering like a guilty secret. The constables, alert to the sound of crunching leaves, watched as he slipped into the gatehouse, his movements hurried. Craddock signaled, and they closed in, their boots silent on the damp earth. A brief scuffle echoed through the lane, followed by a shout, and then the stranger was caught, his spade clattering to the ground. Miss Marple learned the details the next morning when Craddock called at her cottage, his face weary but triumphant. "We've got him, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a cup of tea. "Elias Trent, just as you thought. Gray, weathered, but the limp and the scar on his hand gave him away. He confessed to sneaking about the gatehouse, searching for those jewels. Said he came back to Hazelmoor after years abroad, certain his brother Silas hid them there." She nodded, her needles clicking softly. "And the lights, the digging?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Craddock sighed. "His lantern, his spade. He's been at it for weeks, convinced the jewels were under the floorboards. But we found nothing, just like before. He's a stubborn one, though swears they're still there." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Stubbornness blinds people," she said, "like that man in a village I once visited not here, who dug up a field for treasure that was never his." She leaned forward, her voice soft but probing. "Did Elias say why now, after all these years?" Craddock shrugged. "A letter, he claims, from an old friend of Silas's, hinting the jewels were still in Hazelmoor. It was enough to bring him back." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A letter, stirring old dreams, how like human nature to chase such whispers. She thought of Silas, a man clever enough to vanish without a trace. The gatehouse, she suspected, was a distraction, a place too obvious for a cunning thief. "Thank you, Inspector," she said, her mind already turning to the yews along Crook Lane, where Silas had spent so much time. "You've done splendidly, but I wonder if we've looked in the right place. People hide things where they feel safest, like my old friend's gardener, who tucked his savings in a tree." Craddock raised an eyebrow, but promised to keep Elias in custody and search the lane again. As he left, Miss Marple sat back, her knitting forgotten. The trap had caught their man, but the jewels remained elusive, as she felt the puzzle was not yet complete. Tomorrow she would walk the lane herself, to see what the yews might whisper under her watchful gaze. Chapter 7. The Final Thread. The morning sun broke through Hazelmoor's lingering mist. casting a golden glow over the village and bathing Crooked Lane in a rare clarity. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, a tray of tea and biscuits before her, as Inspector Craddock recounted the previous night's success. Elias Trent, now in custody, had confessed to his nocturnal searches in the gatehouse, driven by a decades-old letter hinting at his brother Silas's hidden jewels. Yet the gatehouse had yielded nothing but tools and footprints, and Miss Marple's sharp mind was already turning to the one place no one had thought to look, the ancient yews that lined the lane. "Elias is certain the jewels are there," Craddock said, sipping his tea, "but we've turned that ruin upside down. If Silas hid them, he chose a better spot than his brother imagined." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles, her knitting needles pausing in her lap. "People often look in the obvious places, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, "and miss what's right before them. Like my cousin's gardener, who hid his savings in a hollow tree because no one thought to check the orchard." Craddock leaned forward, intrigued. "You think the jewels are elsewhere?" Miss Marple inclined her head. "Silas was clever, wasn't he? A groundskeeper, fond of his yews, as Mrs. Langley's records told us. Those trees along Crooked Lane are old, some hollow with age. I wonder if we might look there." Her tone was mild, but her suggestion carried the weight of certainty. Craddock, accustomed to her insights, nodded. "Worth a try. I'll have my men search the lane this afternoon. Care to join us, Miss Marple?" She smiled, demurring. "I'll leave the climbing to younger legs, Inspector, but I'll be nearby with my knitting." By noon, Craddock assembled a small team, including a local arborist, to inspect the yews without damaging their gnarled roots. Miss Marple followed at a leisurely pace, her umbrella tapping the cobbles, her eyes scanning the lane with the quiet alertness of a hawk. The yews, their branches heavy and dark, stood like silent guardians, their trunks weathered by centuries. The search began at the lane's entrance, where the trees were thickest. The arborist, a wiry man named Mr. Finch, probed each trunk with care, tapping for hollows. The first few yielded nothing but solid wood and the occasional squirrel's hoard. Miss Marple watched from a nearby bench, her needles clicking, her thoughts on Silas Trent. A man who vanished without a trace, she mused, would choose a hiding place both simple and secure, one tied to his daily work. "People are creatures of habit," she murmured, recalling a case where a thief had stolen coins in a church pew he polished weekly. At the fourth yew, closest to the gatehouse, Mr. Finch paused, his knuckles rapping a dull thud. "This one's hollow," he called, and Craddock's men gathered round. With careful hands, they peeled back layers of bark, revealing a cavity deep within the trunk. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a rusted metal box, its edges green with age. Craddock pried it open, and the sunlight caught a glint of green and blue emeralds and sapphires, nestled in faded velvet, untouched for decades. A murmur rippled through the group, and Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "How very like Silas," she said, almost to herself, "to trust the trees he tended." Craddock, holding the box, shook his head in wonder. "You were right, Miss Marple. The gatehouse was a decoy Silas hid them where no one would look." He turned to her, his admiration plain. "How did you know?" She shrugged, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Observation, Inspector, and a little understanding of human nature. Silas loved his yews, and men like him hide their secrets in places they know best. Like my old friend's maid, who tucked her letters in a flower pot because it was hers alone." Craddock grinned, ordering the jewels secured for evidence. "Elias," he said, "would be devastated to learn his years of searching had missed the mark so completely." As the village buzzed with the news, Hazelnor settled back into its quiet ways. Mrs. Pemberley recounted the tale with relish at the tea shop. Bessie added her own flourishes, and Mrs. Cutler hugged Tommy tightly, relieved his adventure had ended safely. Miss Marple, back in her parlor, poured a fresh cup of tea and gazed out at Crooked Lane, now bathed in evening light. The yews stood as they always had, their secrets finally revealed. "It's curious," she said to herself, "how the past holds such power over people. Like that man in a village, I knew not Hazelmoor, who spent his life chasing a legacy that wasn't his. She thought had been caught by the same trap, driven by a brother's promise and a letter's lure. The jewels, returned to the manor's heirs, closed a chapter Hazelmoor had long forgotten, but Miss Marple knew other secrets would stir in time. For now, she picked up her knitting, her mind already wandering to the next whisper the village might bring. Chapter 8. The Quiet of the Lane. Hazelmoor basked in the gentle glow of an autumn afternoon, its cobbled streets and thatched roofs restored to their customary calm. The discovery of the jewels in the hollow yew had swept through the village like a gust of wind, stirring chatter in every corner, from the rose and thorn tea shop to the grocer's counter. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlor with a pot of Earl Grey and her ever-present knitting, listened to the distant hum of village life, her thoughts lingering on the resolution of Crooked Lane's mystery. The emeralds and sapphires, safely returned to the manor's heirs, had closed a scandal 3 decades old, yet she knew Hazelmoor's quiet was never as simple as it seemed. Inspector Craddock called on her that morning, his step lighter than it had been in days. He settled into her chintz-covered armchair, accepting a biscuit with a grateful nod. "It's done, Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "Elias Trent's been charged trespassing, assault on Mr. Hargreaves, and threatening young Tommy. He's still muttering about those jewels, says he was sure Silas left a clue in the gatehouse." Craddock shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "He never thought to look in the trees." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes bright with quiet amusement. "People do fixate on the obvious, don't they, Inspector? Like my old friend's nephew, who spent weeks searching a cellar for a treasure that was hidden in the attic all along." She sipped her tea, her mind turning over the final threads of the case. Elias, driven by a letter and a brother's whispered promise, had returned to Hazelmoor with a single-minded obsession, blind to the simplicity of Silas's hiding place. The yews, so familiar to the groundskeeper, had been the perfect vault, unnoticed, enduring, and silent. Craddock leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "That letter Elias mentioned, it's real enough. Found it in his coat. Written by a man named Dawkins, an old mate of Silas's, claiming the jewels were still in Hazelmoor. Do you think Silas meant for Elias to find them?" Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture Craddock knew signaled deep thought. "I doubt it," she said. "Silas was clever, and clever men don't trust easily. That letter was likely a boast or a taunt, meant to keep the legend alive without giving away the truth. Like a story I heard once not in Hazelmoor, where a thief left false clues to throw off his pursuers." She set her knitting aside, her gaze drifting to the window where Crooked Lane lay just out of sight. "Silas chose the yews because they were his domain, Inspector. He knew no one would think to look there, not even his brother. And Elias, poor man, was too caught up in the gatehouse's shadow to see the lane itself." Craddock nodded, impressed as always by her ability to unravel human motives. "You've a gift, Miss Marple," he said, rising. "Hazelmoor's lucky to have you." As he left, promising to keep her updated on Elias's case, Miss Marple walked to the village green, where the air was crisp and the leaves crunched underfoot. She passed Mrs. Pemberley, who was regaling a cluster of neighbors with the tale of the jewel's discovery, her voice carrying like a town crier's. Bessie, polishing the grocer's window, waved cheerfully, and Mrs. Cutler, with Tommy in tow, offered a shy nod of gratitude. The boy, chastened by his adventure, clutched his mother's hand, his eyes no longer darting toward the lane. Miss Marple paused by the churchyard, where the yews stood in solemn rows, their secrets now spent. She thought of Silas Trent, a man who had outwitted time itself, his theft preserved in the heart of a tree until chance and observation brought it to light. "People are so predictable," she murmured, "and yet so surprising. Like that woman in a village I knew not here, who hid her past in plain sight, trusting no one would look too closely. Hazelmoor, with its gossip and its gardens, was no different from any village, a tapestry of small lives and hidden truths." Returning home, she settled by the fire. Her knitting resumed as the evening shadows lengthened. The jewels were gone, Elias was in custody, and Crook Lane was quiet once more. But Miss Marple knew that quiet was fleeting. Another whisper, another shadow, would stir the village soon enough, and she would be ready, her sharp eyes and sharper mind ever watchful. For now she poured another cup of tea, the steam curling upward, and smiled at the thought of Hazelmoor's next mystery, waiting just beyond the bend of the lane.